It carries the most exclusive name in the automotive world. It's the tallest all-residential tower south of New York, and it sold out for more than $1 billion before it even opened its doors. So how is the Aston Martin Residences, a building barely 2 years old, already shedding chunks of concrete from its own balconies? When engineers opened it up, they found cracked slabs, exposed steel, and corrosion working through a tower that was supposed to stand for a century. The badge promised perfection. The concrete says otherwise. So what really went wrong behind that famous name? The parcel at 300 Biscayne Boulevard Way sits right where the Miami River meets Biscayne Bay. It was one of the last major waterfront sites of its kind in downtown Miami. In 2014, the Cotto family of Argentina paid $125 million for the 1.3-acre site. The family built its fortune through Cotto Supermarkets, a major Argentine supermarket chain. German Cotto runs the family's US real estate arm through G&G Business Developments, which developed the tower through an entity called Riverwalk East Developments. To sell the vision, G&G partnered with Aston Martin. The British automaker lent its name and its design philosophy to the project. The building's sail-shaped profile was meant to echo the aerodynamics of an Aston Martin sports car, and its two lobbies carried the brand's own signature touches: carbon fibre reception desks, automotive-grade leather door handles, and a bespoke scent engineered to mimic slipping behind the wheel of an Aston Martin. The finished tower stood 817 feet above the bay, with 391 ultra-luxury units. 7 penthouses, each with a private pool, topped the tower. The crown jewel was a nearly 20,000 square foot triplex penthouse, listed at $59 million, which came with an Aston Martin Vulcan, one of just 24 track-only hypercars the company ever built. The pitch worked. By the time it opened in April 2024, 99% of the units had already sold. 1 in 8 buyers reportedly already owned an Aston Martin. There is a certain irony in partnering with a brand known more for beauty than reliability, but buyers were paying for the name on the wall, and the name delivered. Aston Martin's involvement was strictly limited to branding and design consultation. The automaker licensed its name and helped curate the common areas, lobbies, and amenity spaces. It carried zero responsibility for construction, financing, engineering, or property management. Every brochure and every rendering featured the Aston Martin name, but on the legal filings and construction contracts, the brand appeared nowhere. The risk sat entirely with the developer. The general contractor, Coastal Construction, and the design team led by Revuelta Architecture International and De Simone Consulting Engineering. When things went wrong, the logo that sold the dream offered residents zero legal protection. In March 2025, control of the condo association transferred from the developer to unit owners, a standard process in Florida condo law once the majority of units close. The new board, led by attorney and condo owner Michael Diaz Jr., hired Epic Forensics and Engineering to conduct a property condition assessment. What they found reads less like a punch list and more like a structural autopsy. The report documented concrete cracking and spalling across balcony slab edges, with loose pieces creating what the engineers classified as an immediate life safety hazard. Post-tension tendons, the high-strength steel cables that run through concrete slabs and hold the structure in tension, sat exposed in several areas. In South Florida's saltire environment, that exposure matters enormously. Post-tension systems rely on protective grouting and sealed anchor points to keep corrosion at bay. Once salt air reaches the steel, the degradation process accelerates quickly, and repairing tendons buried inside concrete slabs is both disruptive and extremely expensive. Water was getting in where it had no business going. Pool and spa systems were leaking into structural areas, and the waterproofing across multiple systems had failed. Reinforced steel in contact with that water was already corroding. Some balconies were improperly sloped. Engineers also identified a balcony that was visibly drooping, sagging under its own weight when it should sit dead level. All of these findings came from a building where residents had been living for less than 2 years. The EPIC forensics report went well beyond concrete and tendons. Their assessment catalogued problems in masonry, stucco, fire protection systems, mechanical systems, electrical systems, plumbing, railways, painting, waterproofing, doors, pavers, the sea wall, and the elevators. The sea wall was already showing cracks and signs of corrosion despite the building's age. Fire sprinkler joints were loose and leaking. Elevator systems had defects. The scope stretched across nearly every major system in a tower whose repair bill is now projected to run into the millions. More than a dozen major systems, from the concrete to the seawall to the elevators, flagged in a single tower. The critical distinction here is that these are construction defects embedded during the building process. They are fundamentally different from deterioration caused by decades of normal use. Association attorney David Harbour made the point directly. Spalling concrete shouldn't occur in any high-rise. When it shows up in a tower this new, something went wrong during construction. The question that keeps coming up is straightforward. How did a tower with this many alleged defects receive its occupancy approval? Florida allows developers to obtain temporary certificates of occupancy, or TCOs, which permit residents to move in while minor items remain incomplete. During the period between occupancy and association turnover, the developer controls the condo board. That creates a blind window where defects can exist inside a building that people are already living in, with no independent oversight of the structure's condition. Haber told The Real Deal that both the TCO and inspection systems are fundamentally broken, arguing that developers race to get buildings sold while quality construction is less important than getting it sold. If defects of this scope slip through at one of Miami's highest profile projects, the systemic question becomes unavoidable. What about every other tower that went through the same process with less scrutiny and fewer resources to fight back? On April 15, 2026, the Condo Association filed a construction defect lawsuit in Miami-Dade County Circuit Court under Florida Statute 558. The complaint named Riverwalk East Developments, Coastal Construction, Revuelta Architecture International, DeSimone Consulting Engineering, Shamrock Engineering, Capform, and roughly a dozen subcontractors. The association sought at least $750,000 in damages and court-ordered repairs, with the total repair bill expected to reach well into the millions. That marked the second lawsuit in just 10 weeks. In February 2026, the association had already sued German Koto, G&G Business Developments, and more than 10 related entities for fraud, self-dealing, and breach of fiduciary duty. The earlier complaints sought more than $5 million and demanded a full forensic accounting of the building's finances. The fraud lawsuit alleges Koto ran what the complaint calls an immense shell game through a web of related companies. Before handing over association control, the developer-controlled board allegedly signed contracts for building management, concierge services, security, valet, and cleaning to companies owned by Koto or his associates. According to the complaint, these contracts bypassed competitive bidding entirely and carried prices inflated well above market rates. One allegation involves a concierge contract worth $34,334 per month to International Booking, an entity tied to G&G. A board member who was also a G&G employee allegedly signed the agreement without board approval or disclosure of the conflict of interest. The lawsuit claims the services were billed at inflated rates through boilerplate invoices with minimal detail. A separate security contract allegedly went to a firm tied to Koto's associates for close to $800,000. The company the suit says had no prior experience, no track record, and no website. The developer also allegedly leased a unit in the building for $70,000 to serve as a sales office, but the space was reportedly used by Koto's own businesses instead. Observers watching the case have pointed out that the pattern resembles self-dealing, with related parties collecting fees at association expense. The case remains a civil matter, and the defendants deny wrongdoing. But the financial allegations feed directly into the safety story. The same developer-controlled board that skipped competitive bids on service contracts was the board overseeing construction and signing off on the building before turnover. Some of the sharpest frustration among residents centers on what they were promised versus what actually materialized. Buyers were told the building would include a marina, helipad and exclusive beach club access through a ferry service to the Ritz-Carlton on Key Biscayne. Diaz, the condo association president, said he was told a ferry would run directly from the tower to the Ritz. When he contacted the hotel to confirm, they told him the arrangement was nothing more than a fairy tale. Diaz told Realtor.com he'd have better luck getting money from the Tooth Ferry than ever boarding a ferry to the Ritz-Carlton. Buyers committed millions of dollars to units in this tower based on brochures and sales pictures. The question that haunts many of them is where their attorneys and agents were during the purchase process, and why the gap between what was promised verbally and what appeared in the actual contract went unexamined until it was far too late. These were core selling points that drove purchase decisions, and they evaporated after the checks cleared. On June 22, 2026, NIST released its technical findings on the Champlain Tower's south collapse in Surfside. The investigation confirmed that the disaster began weeks before the building fell on June 24, 2021, when two slab column connections beneath the pool deck suffered punching shear failures. Design deficiencies, construction deviations, added loads over the building's lifetime, and long-term corrosion collectively eroded the structure's safety margins. 98 people lost their lives. The Aston Martin Residences is a different building, constructed with different systems, and there is no evidence of imminent structural failure. Making that comparison directly would be irresponsible. But the shared thread is corrosion, the same corrosion already eating at the tower's exposed steel. The Aston Martin Tower sits directly on the water at the mouth of the Miami River, where salt air is relentless, and post-tension systems, which the tower relies on, are arguably more sensitive to corrosion than the reinforced concrete at Surfside, because the tendons are under constant tension, so any weakening of the cable compromises the system at the worst possible point. After Surfside, Florida passed sweeping safety legislation. Senate Bill 4D in 2022 and SB 154 in 2023 mandated milestone inspections for buildings 3 stories or taller once they reach 30 years of age, 25 near the coast, required structural integrity reserve studies every decade, and eliminated associations' ability to waive reserve funding. SB 154 went further, making a structural reserve study part of the mandatory developer turnover, a rule written specifically to stop new boards from inheriting hidden problems. These laws were a direct response to the deferred maintenance and structural neglect uncovered at Surfside. But the Aston Martin Residences opened in 2024 after those reforms took effect, and still its defects surfaced at the very moment those protections were built to matter most: turnover. The uncomfortable question is whether a system that builds towers at the pace and scale Miami demands will ever truly incentivize getting construction right the first time. Pre-construction buying, where residents commit millions based on renderings and promises years before a building is finished, puts enormous trust in developers who may be long gone by the time problems surface. The distance between the name on the brochure and the rebar behind the wall is the entire story of the Aston Martin Residences. In a post-Surfside Miami, that distance carries weight that goes well beyond property values. Both lawsuits remain active as of July 2026. No court has ruled on any of the claims. The defendants have denied wrongdoing, and the legal process will ultimately determine what the building's owners are owed. Do you think branded luxury developments need stronger accountability from the builders behind the branding? Or is this just the cost of buying into a name? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe for more Mega Build stories.